Launch today gave way to the realities and routine of space travel for the crew of Discovery and its elder statesman, John Glenn. Waking this morning to Louis Armstrong's What a Wonderful World and a breakfast of oatmeal, apple cider, and chocolate drink, John Glenn conducted experiments on weightlessness and aging. Glenn also had time to take in the sights, float around the cabin, and enjoy it all. Miles O'Brien joins me now live from the Johnson Space Center with the latest. Miles?
Hello, Lou. Zero G, and he is feeling fine. As a matter of fact, ground controllers are saying the whole crew is doing remarkably well. It's a very busy timeline, and they're actually ahead of their timeline early in the mission, indicating that things are going smoothly in orbit. Now, just about an hour ago, John Glenn, along with Commander Kurt Brown and pilot Steve Lindsay, offered us a little briefing of how things are going in orbit.
Being able to float around like this in zero G is, I just wish everyone could experience this. There's been a track record in the past of a high percentage of the people getting sick sometime within the first day or two. But fortunately, the crew has felt fine up here this time, and we've been doing real well. I had my own concerns about that because when I went up before, I was strapped to the spacecraft, and so I didn't really get this free-floating feeling like you have here. But you have a lot of problems, like eating food that has to be controlled, or if it gets away from you, it gets...
Earlier, a U.S. Navy satellite called PanSat got that free floating feeling. It was deployed flawlessly by Discovery. It will be used to test out systems which may one day be used to find downed flyers, for example. Now, the only problem yesterday, and what was otherwise a flawless launch, was the door, which covers the drag chute at the base of the Space Shuttle Discovery. And you probably have seen the shots right by now. The door actually comes off and hits the bell of engine number 1. It didn't cause any damage to the engine as far as we know right now. Of course, we'll have to check that out later. Nevertheless, that little piece broke into about 18 pieces. The question is, how will this affect the mission? Ground controllers here in Houston say not much at all. That's how the door would look if it were still in one piece. They found it in about 18 pieces. They're investigating as to why it came off, and they also want to find out in the future if they need to redesign that door for any reason. Now, Glenn also spent some time setting up his experiments. After all, there are about 15 experiments which he is actively engaged in. He and Pedro Duque, the first Spaniard in space, spent some time on the middeck getting their experiments ready, getting up and ready to do the work in space which is ahead over this next week. Miles O'Brien, CNN, reporting live from the Johnson Space Center in Houston.
Hey, Miles, thank you. It was 36 years ago that the people of Perth, Australia sent John Glenn a message of good luck as he orbited overhead by turning on every light in the city. The people of Perth did it again for the old space traveler, repeating their gesture with a glow that warmed his heart. John Glenn sent his thanks and said it's been a long time since he had seen that sight, and call it habit, but when Glenn called the Johnson Space Center, he began his transmission by saying Cape, as in Cape Canaveral, instead of Houston. In 1962, when John Glenn flew for the first time, there was no Houston Space Center. It was all set at the Cape, and there was no Kennedy Space Center either. John Kennedy was still president of the United States. Well, something that wasn't even science fiction in 1962 is playing an important role in today's flight, the internet. Websites reported record hits during yesterday's launch. CNN's website recorded its highest traffic ever, almost 500,000 hits per minute before liftoff. Those numbers shattered the previous record set in September, when Congress released the STAR report on the internet.
Its accomplishments are not a thing of the past.
All systems are go.
Orbital pioneer John Glenn returns to space aboard the shuttle Discovery with an international crew on a voyage of scientific exploration. Join Miles O'Brien and Walter Cronkite for the most complete coverage of this historic mission. John Glenn returned to space. Mission coverage continues throughout the day.
Godspeed, John Glenn.
On CNN.
Of work for the astronauts on board the Space Shuttle Discovery. The crew released their communications satellite for the U.S. Navy, and celebrity astronaut John Glenn began work on some of the many medical experiments on aging. Glenn spoke earlier about the mission.
We had a wonderful ride up yesterday, and I was keyed into every little noise and quiver that the that we made on the way up, and it was quite different than the ride I got before, of course, back a long, long time ago. But actually, there are really a couple of aspects of things up here. The personal aspects of just how you operate in this kind of an environment. And the other, of course, is all the research of some 83 different research projects we've had going on board and trying to get all those things fired up and started on during this first day period. Most of those things get activated at least within the first, somewhere around 36 to 48 hours, I think everything is activated. And some of the ones came up powered, and those are ones we'll be servicing as we go along. And those are done by people being assigned as prime responsibilities for that particular research project.
For more on the events on board the Space Shuttle Discovery, here's CNN's Tony Clark with a report.
The first full day on orbit was a busy one for the crew of Discovery, setting up experiments like the Advanced Gradient Heating Furnace, designed to create alloys in microgravity, as well as a system designed to grow crystals in space, and trying out an electronic nose, a device to check for various gases in the shuttle. There are also a number of medical experiments underway on the astronauts themselves.
One I've been involved with here is a body core temperature measuring device where I take a pill about the size of the biggest vitamin pill you ever saw, and it monitors my core body temperature, and it's recorded on a little device that you can see right here on my waist.
Friday, the crew unhooked the shuttle's remote manipulator arm and slowly maneuvered it up and around in preparation for Sunday's deployment of the Spartan satellite. The arm will be used to lift the satellite out of the shuttle's payload bay and leave it in space for 2 days of observations of the sun's corona.
Just about 40 seconds away from deploy of PanSat.
The astronauts also deployed the Navy's small PanSat communication satellite. It will be used for educational purposes by the Naval Postgraduate School in California.
The satellite will be used as a space bulletin board, very similar to email, except it uses amateur radio.
There was also a bit of nostalgia as the shuttle orbited 343 miles above Earth. Residents in Perth, Australia turned on all the lights in town, just as they did 36 years ago when John Glenn passed over in his Mercury capsule. And once again, Glenn was able to look down and see Australia's City of Lights.
We got a good view of Perth, a nice glow, and spread out, and it's been a long time ago. I looked at the same thing from a little lower altitude, but it looks beautiful up here, and you can pass that along to the people of Perth.
Everything appears to be running smoothly on Discovery. NASA engineers are still trying to figure out why the door covering Discovery's drag chute fell off during launch. They believe the chute is still packed in its compartment and will not affect the mission or the landing. The only other real problem the shuttle has experienced has been a leaky hose in a drinking water system that was being tested. The astronauts changed back to their old water processor, so all in all, this shuttle mission has gotten off to an excellent start. Tony Clark, CNN, Johnson Space Center.
Shuttle Discovery has been treated to a light show, the likes of which hasn't been seen in 36 years. The city of Perth, Australia, greeted the astronauts as they flew far overhead by turning on all its lights in honor of the 77-year-old astronaut John Glenn. Perth did that for Glenn in 1962 when he became the first American to orbit the Earth. John Glenn's return to space has caused a wave of patriotism in the United States, but it's had a different reaction elsewhere in the world. CNN's Moscow Bureau Chief Jill Doherty has one perspective from a group of Russian senior citizens.
Just minutes before the shuttle blasted off, NTV anchor Tatiana Mitkova breathlessly broke into programming with a live report. The shuttle Discovery is just about to take off. On board, 77-year-old Senator John Glenn. At Moscow's senior citizen home number 29, Glenn's flight caused quite a stir. A 77-year-old in space. We watched it on TV, says Maria Smirnova, who's 7 years younger than Glenn. To fly at that age is heroism. Good going. Her roommate, Alexander Buyeva, says she was amazed that someone Glenn's age maintained his health and was ready to go back to space again. Mrs. Buyeva may not know the statistics. The average life expectancy of a Russian woman now is 71 years. For a Russian man, it's 57. But she does know how older people live in Russia, and she says it's toughest for them. Pensions are tiny, and even if older people wanted to work, there's no place to go because of all the unemployment. For Valentin Zilba, who just celebrated his 80th birthday, Glenn's flight brought back memories from almost 4 decades ago, when Russian cosmonaut Yuri Gagarin became the first man in space. I had the same feelings that we felt when Gagarin went up, he says, the exact same feelings. This is particularly nice because Gagarin was a lot younger, and this is a more experimental flight. In his youth, Mr. Zilba was in the Soviet Air Force. He says he'd like to fly another time, too. So as John Glenn returns to space, some of Russia's 70-somethings say they're inspired. Into space, Maria Smirnova asks? Sure, I'd fly there, as long as it's okay to live there, she says. I'd go once. I'd just have to come back. Jill Doherty, CNN, Moscow.
And that's world news. In Europe, Asia, and Africa, stay tuned for Q&A. In the Americas, it's Panorama.
John Glenn has returned to space. Join Miles O'Brien and Walter Cronkite for a live interview with John Glenn aboard the Shuttle Discovery on CNN.
Discovery was treated to a light show, the likes of which hasn't been seen in 36 years. The city of Perth in Australia greeted the astronauts as they flew far overhead by turning on all its lights in honor of 77-year-old astronaut John Glenn. Perth did the same thing back in 1962 when Glenn became the first American to orbit the Earth. Glenn denies that this is a mission about him, but many space watchers are keeping an eye on the world's oldest astronaut. CNN's Sean Calebs looks at the man with a mission.
4 hours and 55 minutes in space made John Glenn an American hero for life. Just 3 Earth orbits. But this was 1962, the Cold War. The space race was on, and the Russians were the bad guys.
Back in the old days, we're just trying to figure out, could we do it?
By strapping into Friendship 7 and completing the successful mission, Glenn proved NASA could do it. Glenn had proven himself flying combat missions in World War II and the Korean War. But flying in a spacecraft was far different. A devoted husband to wife Annie and a father of 2, Glenn was now a household name. He cemented his image as a clean-living, God-fearing Marine speaking to Congress after his space flight.
As our knowledge of this universe in which we live increases, may God grant us the wisdom and guidance to use it wisely.
But while Glenn watched other astronauts push the envelope further and further, he found himself grounded. A decision by then-President Kennedy, who didn't want an American icon to die young. Disappointed and disillusioned, Glenn quit the space program in 1965, eventually turning to politics.
Everybody's help out there tomorrow, whatever it snows or not.
In 1984, the U.S. Senator from Ohio made a run at the presidency.
It was an ill-fated candidacy. It never really took off.
Steering clear of conservative or liberal labels, Glenn targeted what he called the sensible center.
But my problem was in the primaries, the sensible center didn't get out and vote in those numbers, and so my candidacy was rather short-lived.
Years later, Glenn learned Ronald Reagan had considered him the #1 Democratic challenger. In 1996, while preparing for a Senate budget debate on NASA, Glenn had an epiphany. Space was the perfect site to study the effects of aging, and he would be the perfect guinea pig. NASA Chief Dan Golden weighed the risks and the benefits and cleared the senator to fly.
John Glenn is a great American hero. We owe him a second flight.
Glenn is now a 77-year-old payload specialist. As he began training, critics called it a colossal waste of money and derided the importance of aging experiments.
If we can afford to send somebody for nothing more than a nostalgia trip, it calls into question what those billion-dollar flights are really for.
True to his nature, Glenn stayed above the fray, embracing the chance to view the planet from an orbit 300 miles above Earth, and allowing millions of people to watch a hero's career come full circle. Sean Calebs, CNN.
The liftoff of a space legend as the Shuttle Discovery roars into history. John Glenn made a triumphant return to space, accompanied by 6 other astronauts.
At age 77, John Glenn is the world's oldest space traveler. He became the first American to go into orbit back in 1962, and he trained long and hard for his return this week as the test subject for studies on the effects of weightlessness and aging.
John Zarella is at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida, ground zero for the historic shuttle launch. John.
Thanks, Tony and Cassandra. I can tell you it has been one fabulous day here at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida. Several 100,000 people watching at every possible vantage point. 3,000 plus media people here to watch this historic day as John Glenn and 6 other astronauts on board Discovery powered into space. It was an event that much of the world was watching. After waiting 36 years, John Glenn's dream to return to space has come true.
4, 3, 2, 1. Booster ignition and liftoff of Discovery with a crew of 6 astronaut heroes and 1 American legend.
In 1962, Glenn left Earth in a capsule built for one. Thursday, he left Earth in a space plane with 6 other astronauts. No event in U.S. space history since the launch of Apollo 11 to the moon has captured so much attention. Glenn's wife and family watched liftoff from a private viewing area. The President and Mrs. Clinton were here, too. A chorus of cheers went up from the hundreds of thousands of people who packed every single you can see it from here spot on the Space Coast.
I think it was going to affect me like it did, but it was really, it was just something you have to see. I don't think you can watch. I don't think TV does it justice. It was really emotional. It gave me goosebumps.
The scheduled 2 p.m. launch was delayed 19 minutes by minor issues.
15.
One with the spacecraft. The second when unauthorized planes had to be cleared from the airspace.
9.
For NASA, the near-perfect countdown brought well-dones for the shuttle team from the first president since Nixon to be on hand for a space launch.
We had confidence in you and pride in America and a conviction that our space program is good for the United States and good for the world.
9.
While the countdown was near perfect, on liftoff, a panel that covers the landing drag chute fell off, just as the vehicle's engines fired up.
We are evaluating at this time. We do not expect this to impact your mission. If it was a drag chute door, this is not a hazardous condition, and we expect the mission to proceed as scheduled.
Glenn and the crew began their day with the traditional early morning breakfast photo opportunity. A couple hours later, with spacesuits on, they waved as they left for the launch pad and their appointment with history. Mercury astronaut Scott Carpenter added another chapter to the history books with a variation on his immortalized words uttered first on February 20th, 1962.
Good luck. Have a safe flight. And to say once again, Godspeed, John Glenn.
NASA officials don't believe that the drag chute door is the kind of problem that would force them to shorten this mission or to make any other changes in the mission. That's the position right now, and that's good news, because there's lots of science to be done in 9 days, and we all know John Glenn wants to spend every second possible in space. This is John Zarella reporting from the Kennedy Space Center in Florida. Back to you, Tony, Cassandra.
Well, the planned 9-day shuttle mission is packed with all kinds of science experiments, and to bring it all to you, CNN is proud to have former CBS News anchor and journalistic giant Walter Cronkite as part of our shuttle coverage team. Cronkite, on the right, was there over 30 years ago for John Glenn's first flight.
Missing from the picture, however, CNN's longtime space correspondent John Holloman, who died tragically last month. CNN has dedicated its ongoing coverage of the mission to John's memory.
Here, John Glenn has returned to space. Join Miles O'Brien and Walter Cronkite for a live interview with John Glenn aboard the Shuttle Discovery on CNN.
Day 2 of the United States Shuttle Discovery mission included a trip down memory lane for veteran astronaut John Glenn. On Friday, the city of Perth, Australia, reprised a 36-year-old greeting, switching on seemingly every light in the city. Here, John Glenn recaps for us the events of the day.
Thank you, Kurt, and thank you all down there. It has been a great ride so far. As Kurt said, we had a wonderful ride up yesterday, and I was keyed into every little noise and quiver that we made on the way up, and it was quite different than the ride I got before, of course, back a long time ago. To be able to float around like this in zero G is, I just wish everyone could experience this. There's been a track record in the past of a high percentage of the people getting sick sometime within the first day or two, but fortunately the crew has felt fine up here this time, and we've been doing real well. I had my own concerns about that because when I went up before, I was strapped to the spacecraft, and so I didn't really get this free-floating feeling like you have here. One thing you may notice, I think, which is probably still fairly evident, is the fluid body shift that occurs early in flight. Yesterday, everyone was puff-faced around here, looked like the Poppin' Fresh Doughboy or something like that, and I think my face is still swelled up some. I know Shocky's face was swelled up. I think, Kurt, you've pretty well come down today. I don't know whether Steve is still up a little bit or not. I think you are. But I guess I'm still a little round-faced here today, and that comes from the fluid body shift that occurs. And I'll just tell you, the view is just something that is just so hard to describe, and it's moving, it's emotional. When you can look out and see the curvature of the Earth like that, and see the towns, and we did have a good view of Perth last night. That was quite exciting. Came over Perth, and the lights of Perth were on, and there was a big gap in the clouds, and we could see it very clearly, and I hope that message got passed along to the people of Perth, because I can tell you Perth has expanded in size since the last time I looked at it from in orbit, and it looked great. I hope we got some good pictures of it. We tried anyway.
Back on Earth, technical team pose a problem for the mission. The Space Shuttle Discovery's mission is going into its third day. Friday was a busy one for the astronauts. They released a communications satellite for the United States Navy, and veteran astronaut John Glenn began work on some of his medical experiments on aging. Glenn described the mission this way.
We had a wonderful ride up yesterday, and I was keyed into every little noise and quiver that we made on the way up, and it was quite different than the ride I got before, of course, back a long time ago. But actually, there are really a couple of aspects of things up here. The personal aspects of just how you operate in this kind of an environment, and the other, of course, is all the research of some 83 different research projects we've had going on board, and trying to get all those things fired up and started on during this first day period. Most of those things get activated at least within the first somewhere around 36 to 48 hours. I think everything is activated, and some of the ones came up powered, and those are ones we'll be servicing as we go along, and those are done by people being assigned as prime responsibilities for that particular research project.
For more on the flight of Discovery, here's CNN's Tony Clark.
The first full day on orbit was a busy one for the crew of Discovery, setting up experiments like the Advanced Gradient Heating Furnace, designed to create alloys in microgravity, as well as a system designed to grow crystals in space, and trying out an electronic nose, a device to check for various gases in the shuttle. There are also a number of medical experiments underway on the astronauts themselves.
One I've been involved with here is a body core temperature measuring device where I take a pill about the size of the biggest vitamin pill you ever saw, and it monitors my core body temperature, and it's recorded on a little device that you can see right here on my waist.
Friday, the crew unhooked the shuttle's remote manipulator arm and slowly maneuvered it up and around in preparation for Sunday's deployment of the Spartan satellite. The arm will be used to lift the satellite out of the shuttle's payload bay and leave it in space for 2 days of observations of the sun's corona.
Just about 40 seconds away from deploy of PanSat.
The astronauts also deployed the Navy's small PanSat communication satellite. It will be used for educational purposes by the Naval Postgraduate School in California.
The satellite will be used as a space bulletin board, very similar to email, except it uses amateur radio.
There was also a bit of nostalgia as the shuttle orbited 343 miles above Earth. Residents in Perth, Australia turned on all the lights in town, just as they did 36 years ago when John Glenn passed over in his Mercury capsule. And once again, Glenn was able to look down and see Australia's City of Lights.
We got a good view of Perth, a nice glow, and spread out, and it's been a long time ago. I looked at the same thing from a little lower altitude, but it looks beautiful up here, and you can pass that along to the people of Perth.
Everything appears to be running smoothly on Discovery. NASA engineers are still trying to figure out why the door covering Discovery's drag chute fell off during launch. They believe the chute is still packed in its compartment and will not affect the mission or the landing. The only other real problem the shuttle has experienced has been a leaky hose in a drinking water system that was being tested. The astronauts changed back to their old water processor, so all in all, this shuttle mission has gotten off to an excellent start. Tony Clark, CNN, Johnson Space Center.